All right, hi guys, this is Coach Barreline again, and today we're going to wrap up World War II with your last video lesson. And we're going to talk about how the Allies were completing their defeat of the Axis powers, and at the same time they're making plans for the post-war world. So we're going to talk about how the Allies defeated Germany in Europe and Japan in the Pacific, and the challenges that the United States and the Allies faced after the war. So, if you remember, in our last video lesson, the United States and the Allies had invaded France and Normandy and put Germany on the defensive, while the Soviet Union was pushing from the east after Germany's defeat at Stalingrad. So, Germany's kind of on the defensive, and they staged their last-ditch offensive at the Battle of the Bulge, which ultimately fails. And so now Germany has very few soldiers left to defend the homeland. At this point, you got 4 million Allied troops on the western border and, millions more on the eastern border. And more or less it becomes a race to Berlin between the Allies on the western front and Russia on the eastern. So the big three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Joseph Stalin, meet in Yalta at the Yalta Conference to make plans for the end of the war. Meantime, Allied forces have crossed the Rhine River in the west. And basically, the decision is made by Roosevelt and his military commanders to allow Berlin to be taken by the Soviets. In April of 1945, as the Allies are bearing down from all sides, Hitler realizes that all is lost and basically commits suicide in his Berlin bunker along with his mistress, Eva Braun. So the Yalta Conference, they're basically, the big three are trying to figure out, what's going to happen after the war is over with Europe. And the key goal was to determine what to do with Germany. And what they did is they divided into 4 sectors. And each of the Allies would control each one of those sectors. So you had a Soviet, British, French, and American sector. And the city of Berlin was divided as well. So Germany was divided into 4 sectors, and the city of Berlin was divided into 4 sectors as well, even though it falls completely within the Soviet realm of Germany. So another agreement had to do with what to do with Poland. So basically, Stalin at that time agrees. Basically, he says, let us continue occupation. After the war, we'll let each of these countries like Poland and other Eastern European nations, Czechoslovakia, whatever, hold elections. Stalin also said that that the Soviets would join the war effort in Japan 3 months after Germany was defeated. To give the Soviet army time to mobilize on the Pacific front. So, like I said, the Rhine was crossed, or like I said, the Rhine was crossed. Hitler orders his troops to make a stand at the Rhine River, and they try to blow up bridges to stop the Allied advance. But the decision to defend the river turns out to be just another one of Hitler's military mistakes. So as he's doing that. The Soviets are storming in from the east. And Eisenhower, in consultation with Roosevelt, decides, along with consultation with Roosevelt, decides to just go ahead and let the Soviets have Berlin. He believed that it would be bloody, it would be hard to take, and that it might be better just to let the Soviets take it anyway. So on April 30th, 1945, Hitler commits suicide in his bunker along with his mistress. Berlin is surrendered by the leaders that remain on May 2nd, 1945, and they surrender. Excuse me. They surrender. Germany surrenders on the 7th. So that's how it works. So May 8th was proclaimed VE Day, which stands for Victory in Europe Day. Now in the Pacific, you still got a war going on against an enemy that's not going to quit. Japan was, had shown time and again that they're going to fight to the last man. And nowhere was this more true than in Okinawa. You had you had thousands of, tens of thousands of Allied losses, Americans mostly. Americans lost in the Battle of Okinawa. Hundreds of thousands of Okinawan civilians were killed, and beyond that, you have a very high rate of battle fatigue and what we've now called post-traumatic stress disorder. So General MacArthur and Admiral Nimitz are busy planning the invasion of mainland Japan. However, to soften up defenses, they use what's called firebombing. And firebombing is going to result in the death of hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians because most Japanese cities were built mainly out of wood. So actually the firebombing was more destructive than the atomic bombs wound up being. At any rate, Truman during this time in late July learns that the atomic bomb that has been worked on by the Manhattan Project is finally ready for testing, and they have a successful test. And Truman decides partially in order to save the lives of U.S. troops, but also to kind of flex his muscles for the Soviets, decides to drop an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima, Japan. All right, so Truman had become president after Roosevelt died, and he didn't even know that the bomb existed or the Manhattan Project at all when he was vice president. It wasn't until he becomes president they're like, Mr. President, there's this new weapon that we're developing. It's going to be really destructive and things of that nature. So Truman knows he has this bomb. He knows he's got to try to maintain as strong a negotiating position with the Soviets as he can. So, he consults with his advisors and decides, this would be a way to do both, to save American lives from invading mainland Japan, but also to basically play a trump card with the Soviets in negotiations. So they decide to drop the bomb on a Japanese city without a warning. So on August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay drops the first atomic bomb, nicknamed Fat Man. There's a little boy. I can't remember. Anyway, little boy or Fat Man. Enola Gay drops its atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima, and yet the Japanese don't surrender. Of course, historians found out later that the Japanese government was in such chaos after the bomb that they didn't have the capability necessarily to surrender. But the United States waits a day, still no surrender, or 2 days, still no surrender, and on August 9th drops a second bomb on the city of Nagasaki. I believe Fat Man was Hiroshima, Little Boy was Nagasaki. Still, this didn't bring an end to the war immediately. Finally, however, on August 15th, Emperor Hirohito himself makes an address on Japanese radio basically saying that Japan was surrendering. This is unprecedented. The emperor didn't make public appearances, and he certainly didn't speak on the radio, but the destruction was so devastating that he felt compelled to go ahead and surrender. So the war's over. Now, the Allies have to go about reshaping this new post-war world. And one step is an old idea that Woodrow Wilson had called the League of Nations, and which existed prior, but they form the United Nations. Representatives from 50 countries around the world meet, and the point is to encourage cooperation rather than war as a resolution for conflict. The Potsdam Conference was actually going on during the end of the war, and actually the bomb was dropped during the Potsdam Conference between the big three. And in fact, during the Potsdam Conference, Churchill was voted out as Prime Minister of England. So you have a change of leadership in Britain. So you start the Potsdam Conference with Churchill and end with his successor. But anyway, they met in Potsdam. and tried to discuss the spread of communism and how to limit Soviet influence. But he wanted Stalin to live up to the promises he had made to Roosevelt at Yalta, and Stalin didn't. There were no free elections, none of that stuff. They were established as Eastern European, what Stalin called buffer states to prevent invasion from Western nations. MacArthur, meanwhile, in Asia, was tapped to lead the rebuilding efforts in Japan. And basically, the United States led efforts to rebuild the Japanese government and economy, and it's wildly successful. And the same thing happens in Europe, and this causes tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, obviously. So that's kind of going to lead us to where we're at right now. You got tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and that's going to continue to build into our next unit, which is on the Cold War. So as you finish up all your video lessons, please remember to be taking your quizzes whenever you're prepared to do so, and be ready for our unit exam coming up. And also keep up with your daily assignments and things of that nature in class. So this will end us up on World War II, and we'll see you again on the Cold War. All right, bye.